I've got to tell you, and I'll be up front, I did chop down a really big tree once, okay?
Oh, dear.
No, but
I planted 20 more to make up for it.
Yeah, well, we've planted a lot more. But on the other hand, we also sold a property that had probably in that area the oldest and biggest totara that I'd ever seen anywhere in any city.
Yeah, wow.
And when we went back and visited, I just about cried. It was gone.
Yeah.
So is that what this is about?
Yeah, and that's happening even more rapidly all over all of our cities because we've got no tree protection on private land. And money talks, and it's much easier to clear fell everything on a section, get the bulldozers in, and then just put up your apartments wall to wall, take up every inch of space, make as much money as you can and move on to the next one. And that's what's happening. And it won't be very long before we lose all our mature trees because they're competing for space with development. And unless we do something about that and legislate to do something about that, then we will very quickly lose the rest of our mature trees in our cities. And that will cause us problems because these trees do an awful lot for us at the moment. They treat our stormwater, they treat our air pollution, they give us oxygen to breathe, they reduce the temperature, they're storing carbon, they're preventing flooding. And if we get rid of them all, that's going to cost us real money to replace the infrastructure that these trees give us for nothing and actually give us more of the older they get and the bigger they get. They're the only asset that increases its value with age.
But Mels, there's several layers in this conversation, and let's see if we can address them. You know, a developer comes along and spends millions of dollars buying a block of land, a little block of land somewhere in one of our urban areas, and they're going to build some houses or they're going to build high-rise, right? And there's a value per metre. Not just of purchasing, but if they can put a building on it, and if it can be 2 stories or 3 stories, they get a better return on that meterage. Now, if you've got a giant potakawa there, it could take up half of the property. So when you come as a developer, it's kind of like you go, it's one tree, and if it stays there, it's going to undermine the foundations. It's probably already undermining the pavement out on the street. There's a whole lot of other things going on. There is an argument for some of the trees that we have are the wrong trees in the right place, or they're the right trees in the wrong place.
Well, it all depends about what you call the right tree in the right place, doesn't it? And if you're a developer that just wants to maximise your capital gain in the short term, then you're going to see any tree as the wrong tree in the wrong place if you want to build a building on there. But it's about what we as a society want in terms of our quality of urban living. And if we want mature trees in our cities, and so many people do, and many cities around the world actually value their urban forest, and we don't in New Zealand, then we need to make sure that the rules say that you can't just waltz in and cut anything that you like down without having to ask anybody, because otherwise that is what's going to happen, because money will override any other kind of incentive. So there has to be rules, there has to be financial incentives to get people to value trees more and build around them and plan around them better. Well, Mels, just have those conversations.
Well, it's not just a matter of having a conversation, because what happens is there's a line gets drawn in the sand, and there are some we were talking about extremists in the last day. Some extremists will save the tree at any cost, and then you have the developer that wants to take the tree out at any cost. But there is you use the term ownership. There is a level of responsible ownership amongst a lot of people. Like, as you said, chop down one tree, you're going to plant 20 more. And there are people actually doing that. But they're not necessarily, you're chopping down the tree where you're going to build your apartments, but the 20 are being planted somewhere else in the city because they can't plant them there. It doesn't make sense. So how much latitude do we have here? How much letting go and sort of meeting in the middle do we have?
Well, I think the problem is that we've had 6 years of letting go. That's the problem. We've had 6 years of letting go, and we've lost 250,000 trees in Auckland alone over that time, and that's a really conservative estimate of how many trees we've lost. And the council's own surveys show that those are the big trees that we're losing. So 75% of the urban forest is now less than 10 metres in height, only 6% of it is over 20 metres and less than 1% of it is over 30 metres high. So those magnificent trees that you talked about in your introduction now represent less than 1% of the of the tree canopy cover in Auckland. And that's what we know about. We don't even know about most of the other cities, how much we're losing. We've got no idea because of exactly how many trees we're losing every day. We've estimated by talking to the ARB companies, we're losing about 1,000 a week, and that's not including wholesale land clearances. That's just individual trees on private land sections, and that's not including the ones that also get cut down in our parks and on our streets, the public trees that are actually protected.
Well, personally, I have a problem with someone saying, I own your tree, Danny, and I'm going to tell you what you're going to do with it. I mean, I'm pretty responsible, and we are planting out and doing all sorts of stuff, but personally, I have a problem with someone telling me what's going to happen to my tree. And I can see why you'll get pushback. Because whether they want to chop it down or not is the level of, it's my tree, isn't it?
Well, you're just the guardian of that tree for as long as you live in that property. You're there for how long? 5 years, maybe? 10 years, maybe? How long's that tree been there? 100 years? 150 years? 200 years? How much longer is it going to be there? So do you own that tree, or are you just a tenant of that tree's land during the time that you're there? Are you actually its kaitiaki? Are you supposed to be looking after it? And in actual fact, you're making a short-term decision to remove that tree, which is going to affect everybody in your neighbourhood, because people get real benefits like physical health benefits and mental health benefits from seeing trees in their neighbourhood, whether they're on their own property or on somebody else's property. And that's been measured. That's an international research. It's a physical fact. We get reduced heart rate, lower blood pressure from being able to see trees, even if they're across the road on somebody else's section. So it actually physically benefits our health. So if we get rid of all of the big trees in our cities, we're all going to be sicker. We're all going to be less healthy. It's not good for us to live in an environment where we don't have big trees.
So we live in an area where there are some big trees, and some of them are called Norfolk pines. And when they were planted, they weren't very big. They are now so big that if they fell, and they will fall, they'll take out about 8 houses. Now,
removing a dangerous tree, even if there's tree protection, you just get an assessment done of whether it's dangerous or not, and then you can remove it. It's not, if there's an issue with it, then you can do something about it. The point is that there's none of that decision making is going on right now. There's just, I can do what I like. I walk out with a chainsaw. I make a 2-minute decision. I don't talk to anybody. Tree's gone. That's it. Repercussions are for a lifetime. And that's it, tree's gone. And once you've put a building on there or a driveway on there and covered it in concrete, you can't retrofit large trees back into that space. So we need to legislate to protect the trees now. Otherwise, that's it forever. They're gone. And that's why we're asking people to go to stopthechop.co.nz and make a submission now on the new legislation that the government is consulting about at the moment. Or you can text trees to 9090 and we'll send you the link. But it's really important for the people that actually think that the balance has gone way too far in terms of letting people do whatever they want on their properties in terms of their trees. And we need to have some rules back about our mature trees so that we can retain some large trees in our cities for the benefit of absolutely everybody. And, today's weather, flooding, a large tree, mature tree, will treat 16 cubic metres of water a year. And if that tree goes, then you've got to find a pipe big enough to take that 16 cubic metres of water per year. If we've lost 250,000 trees in 6 years, that's over 4.4 million cubic metres of water that now have to go into a pipe.
Yeah, but
that's going to cause flooding.
Mels, under the old regime, when trees were protected before it was lifted, I also lived in a suburb where the Poutakā was blocked up all the drains and the sewers, and you weren't allowed to chop their roots. And that 16 cubic metres of water went all over your house and under your house and down into the neighbour's property because the drains were blocked by a tree, but you weren't allowed to cut them. So that's part of why it was lifted. But what I'm hearing is, have they taken back too much of the protection?
Yes, they basically took off all of the protection other than individually listed scheduled trees. And the bar for scheduling a tree is so high that you can't get new trees onto the schedule. And in fact, the council decided back in November that they weren't going to add any of the 500 odd trees that had been nominated for scheduling because they couldn't be bothered to spend $1 million on processing those applications. So even though people have nominated trees over the last 11 years since the unitary plan has been in place for scheduling because they were really important, rare, big, historic, whatever, not a single one of them has been added to the schedule because the council hasn't processed any of those applications. So even under the current regime where potentially you could protect a tree, you can't because it's just not being processed by the council. So we've basically got no tree protection whatsoever apart from the trees that were already listed before the Auckland Super City came into effect. Not a single new tree has been added to that schedule in all of that time. And we're just losing the ones that are on private land now, hand over fist. And it is time to call a halt to that while we still have that 1% left that's over 30 metres high. And do something about having those, grown-up conversations about, can we actually build around this tree? Can we have a better outcome here for everybody and for future generations? Why do we have to live in a concrete jungle where there isn't any grass and there aren't any trees and people feel hemmed in and unhealthy? Why is that acceptable? Other cities manage it. Brisbane has 44% tree cover and they've got 2.4 million people. That's nearly twice as many as Auckland. But they manage to have trees as well as houses. So it's not an either or. It's about good design and it's about good planning and it's about having some rules. And we need to get the rules back in. So go to stopthechop.co.nz or text trees to 9090 and make a submission and help us.
Mels, nice to have you with us, Mels Barton. Stop the Chop, go and check it out. Now, I want to open this one up. Guys, 0800 844 747. I mean, I've already raised it. And Mel's got back to me and she said, no, you're just the kaitiaki of the tree. You're the one that's looking after it. I understand that concept totally. Of course you are. Because, you leave this mortal coil and the tree hopefully will still be there if you've planted it. But who actually owns the tree? Is it the property owner that owns the tree and they have a right to do what they wish with it? Is it the fact that maybe we should be planting more native trees and let's take out all the old oaks and all the other ones that aren't native and don't feed the native birds and put in trees that will actually feed the native birds? And or in your own neighbourhood,